weil ich ein uneheliches Kind bin. Sie war unheimlich religiös. Und um die Schande zu tilgen, hat sie mich in ein Kloster gesteckt.
Hey guys, welcome back to Pillbox Movies. I'm Hank, and today we're going to be watching the 1983 Austrian horror film, Angst, or Fear. This is a film by Austrian director Gerald Kargl. It is one of the most controversial, extreme horror movies of all time. Horror is a little bit of a loaded term. It's a serial killer movie. It's a movie about a psychopath being released from prison and the mayhem he wreaks before being captured again. The film is based off of the real-life events of Werner Kniesek. It stars Erwin Leder. Yeah, this film was very controversial in its time. I believe it was banned in many countries across Europe at the time of its release. Nevertheless, it is well known amongst horror aficionados and is said to be a big influence on Gaspar Noé's filmic style, for example. I've seen like half of this movie, and I don't know, I just need an excuse to finish it, I guess. So yeah, let's watch Angst. And before we get started, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for more old, obscure, and art house films. This is probably one of those movies that you're better off not showcasing in your channel, but for whatever reason, I've wished to represent as full a spectrum as possible of movies on my channel, so long as they're not like Hollywood blockbusters and superhero movies. And we're going to see the introduction of a very familiar kind of camera usage in this film. A constantly moving camera, almost no static shots in this movie, except for a couple establishing or reaction shots that I can think of, but giving a lot of kineticism to the camera, making it as active and ecstatic and kinetic as possible, and really engaging you as a viewer in the kineticism, the violence of the film.
Sonst aber habe ich meinen Fantasien freien Lauf lassen können. Das hat mir geholfen, diesen Drang, einfach ein Ventil zu schaffen.
I'm not sure what the actual setup is, but given some of the shots that I've seen in this movie, I assume that that Erwin Leder is wearing a rig on which in some shots the camera can swivel around, and it's being operated by the cinematographer Zbigniew, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Rybczyński. Yeah, with this kind of shot that you might be familiar with in like a Spike Lee movie, for example. And a lot of these extreme angles to kind of unbalance you or unmoor you. One thing I really noticed about this movie my first time around is just how huge and obsessive and grating the sound design is. Like, the sound of their shoes clacking against the concrete or against the linoleum is so big in comparison to how it would be in other movies, and they really try and forefront all these kind of elements to make things in the movie as like viscerally sickening as possible.
Wenn man alles zusammennimmt, so bin ich wohl mehr als die Hälfte meines Lebens hinter Gittern gesessen. Nur, aus bloßer Freude allein habe ich nie ein Verbrechen begangen. Es war immer ein gewisses Etwas, das hinzugekommen ist.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting how lethargic and gentle a lot of these crane shots are. It's kind of angelic the way they're portraying the prison and the calm before the storm.
Es wird wieder passieren. Es muss. Aber diesmal werden sie mich nicht erwischen.
This time they won't get me. And just warning, this movie kind of sucks. Like, it's kind of really graphic, so just prepare yourself for that.
Ich wäre auch zu aufgeregt gewesen. Die ganze letzte Nacht schon habe ich nicht mehr schlafen können.
And if that's your thing, enjoy.
Da sind tatsächlich zwei gesessen. Sie waren noch ziemlich jung, aber das wäre schon gegangen.
disgusting. The scene of him eating the bratwurst.
Ich bin mir etwas blöd vorgekommen, so wie ich angezogen war. Aber nach 10 Jahren
He's like
Knast
not
kann man
barely
nicht
chewing,
modern
he's
gekleidet
not
sein.
swallowing, just keeps on taking more and more into his mouth.
Sie haben mich angestarrt. Ich war gleich voll da.
So much louder than it needs to be.
Richtig provoziert haben sie mich. Meine Fantasie ist gleich mit mir abgefahren.
Yeah, and this very kind of choppy, frenetic editing style, always keeping you within the perspective of Kay. and also like in his perspective, but also like judging it, seeing his reactions, seeing his kind of brutality and sadism in effect. It's a really weird kind of nauseating kind of effect, seeing his perspective and then judging his perspective in such fast vacillations, going back and forth and back and forth and
Aber
back
im
and forth.
Espresso wäre das zu auffällig gewesen. Man hätte sofort alles gehört. Das war keine günstige Gelegenheit. Die Gelegenheit im Taxi war einfach günstig. Raubüberfall sollte es keiner werden. An Geld war ich nicht interessiert.
And this lovely kind of performance by Irvin later that when you see the master shots, the wider shots, he's never making eye contact. He's always kind of diffusive and evasive. But when you get right up in those close-ups, it's always his eyes staring deeply and concentratedly and fixedly. And there's this kind of obsession to it that he's masking in these wider shots.
Wir sind im Park auf einer Bank gesessen. Ich habe einen Schuh ausziehen müssen. Den Schuh hat sie mir weggenommen.
Was machen Sie?
Und ich sollte ihn erst wieder zurückbekommen.
It's
wenn
a
ich
very
ihm Fuß dafür
off-putting
gebe.
performance for many
Annemarie hat
reasons.
mich dann zu ihr nach Hause mitgenommen.
It's really impressive. I just hate this camera style. It's intentionally oppressive and to make you feel ill at ease. But you definitely see the influence of this on Gaspar Noé and the kind of fluid way he chooses to film his movies. Just thoroughly impressed by how smooth some of these motions are. I guess they have some sort of gimbal or something. Something to stabilize the shot just a little bit.
Ich konnte kaum Luft holen. Ich war irrsinnig aufgeregt.
Something that's so strange, and I guess perhaps it's like a real-life detail, is how spare this house is. I don't know if this family was like newly moved here, but I don't know, they have like plenty of groceries.
Meine Opfer. Ich hatte Angst.
Ich habe Angst.
Papa.
Ich hatte Angst vor mir selbst.
Afraid of myself. Fair enough.
Schon früher einmal habe ich große Angst gehabt. Die Großmutter hat mich dann einmal eine ganze Nacht lang allein ins dunkle Zimmer gesperrt. Ich habe gedacht, sie bringt mich um. Geholfen haben mir nur diese Geräusche.
The thing that helped me were those sounds. Okay, so that might be an indication as to why they've punched up the audio so much. That part of the way that this character kind of identifies the world, or how he kind of navigates through the world, is through auditory experiences. So he might fixate on sounds, and as a result, the movie tries to reproduce that sensation. And so we have a list of our prospective victims: a mother, a daughter, a disabled son, and a dog.
Mutti, Papa ist da.
Aber red kein Blödsinn. Der ist ja schon lang tot.
War. Krieg.
Als Kind habe ich um mein Leben immer Angst haben müssen. Meine Mutter hat zuerst meinen Vater rausgeschmissen.
There's this weird kind of meditative quality to the movie as well. During like kind of extreme acts of violence, to go through this like voiceover of the character, to kind of experience how like serene he is or thoughtful he is during these acts. It's very strange.
Am offenen Fenster verkühlen und sterben.
Silvia!
Vor meiner Mutter war ich nie wirklich sicher. Sie hat Buben gehasst.
It's an interesting mix again of being very frenzied and hysterical, but also he's being quite methodical, cutting off points of escape, trying to destable them each in his own way.
Ich war Luft für sie. Meine Schwester hat mit mir machen können, was sie wollte. Meine Mutter hat dazu immer nur gelacht.
Yeah, in its own way, I don't know, we'll see. But in its own way, this movie focuses on different things than other horror movies. It's not as it's not as interested in displaying kind of the rote presentations of like suspense or thrill, like the mechanics or the push and pull of a normal horror movie. It's instead concentrated on relentlessness, on holding the audience in an experience for as long as possible.
Weil ich ein uneheliches Kind bin.
And again, it's this interesting presentation of this character that in his voiceover, you hear a kind of perspective that he has of himself kind of as a victim, as being the powerless and the oppressed within the perspective of these anecdotes, when he's clearly displaying dominance and brutalism and is the forceful actor, is the psychopath, the murderer.
Meine Mutter hat nach dem Vorfall im Kloster gemeint, dass meine Familie vor mir Angst haben muss.
I keep on repeating the phrase Angst.
Jetzt, sie hat nie etwas abbekommen von seinem Hass. Einmal hat er mich so fest geschlagen, bis ich am Boden gekrochen bin. Meine Mutter und meine Schwester sind daneben gestanden und haben gelacht.
Hurt people, hurt people. It's kind of an interesting dynamic of the movie that either based on because of real life events or because of the specific focus of this movie, we're not allowed into the victim's mentality at all. They actually don't speak throughout this entire movie, except for kind of like few short phrases like the son saying dad was here. But it tries to limit its scope as much as possible, reduce it down purely into the perspective of Kay. Create more of a spare vision, almost like a play. Reduce down the elements as much as possible to kind of give focus or spotlight the actions and the actors and the performances.
habe mir vorgestellt, dass ich mich jetzt räche.
Love that shot. Yeah, and to give you just another warning, it's like 40 more minutes of just this. I don't even know if I'm going to find more stuff to comment on. It'll just be this stuff.
Es ging zu schnell. Ich habe mir es ganz anders vorgestellt. Viel, viel dramatischer. Meinen Plan wollte ich wenigstens jetzt noch einhalten.
And take everything slowly.
Zuerst sollte die Mutter ihren toten Sohn besichtigen. Sie sollte genau betrachten, wie er sich nicht mehr rühren kann. Das wird ihr Respekt einflößen. Das ist unmöglich.
Oh my God.
Aber sie sollte doch nicht ohnmächtig sein.
The camera's gonna drive me nuts.
Sie musste doch jede Phase ganz genau erleben. Ich hatte die Fäden nicht mehr in der Hand.
Sie braucht Medizin. In der Küche.
Die Junge hat versucht, mich zu kriegen. Entweder habe ich ihr so gut gefallen, oder sie hat sich nur retten wollen. Aber das war egal. Sie wusste es nur nicht. Ich habe ganz was Spezielles für sie gehabt. Sie wird am meisten aushalten. Das war klar. In der Küche habe ich schon verschiedene Gegenstände bemerkt. Mit ihr werde ich es am genauesten machen. Exakt das, was ich mir immer vorgestellt habe. Sie musste noch wimmern und Angst haben vor mir. Dann musste die Tochter zusehen, wie sie ihr Leben aushaucht. Ich habe sie fertig gemacht.
And like for these stalking scenes, the editing slows down tremendously, the camera slows down tremendously. It all like calms down so that when you get to the rush of the violence, it'll be that much more jarring. Yeah. And it isn't kind of an interesting, how would I say it? It's an interesting presentation of a character, how unaligned his actions are with his interior perception, that he wants to think of himself as methodical, like acting in calm and playing out an extreme fantasy that's inside of his head. And when you actually see him in action, it's completely out of control and chaotic, and well, he's drinking her blood. But he's not as he's not as bombastic as he imagines himself to be. He's not as he's not as like as much of a supervillain or in control or grandiose as he imagines. His actions do depict like the full depravity of humanity, but not. This was not him acting out of. This is not him showing dominance through will. This was him shooting out erratically, and in that there is a sort of condemnation, or even to a degree the movie just sucks, laughing at him or defiling him or demeaning him and saying that all of this was out of his control. Even his desires were out of his control. He's a wretched human being. He's not powerful. He's not. He is not dominant. He's just so dumb.
Ich wollte die Toten nicht so einfach im Haus zurücklassen.
And this is the only way he can exert control again, by controlling the corpses. Those POV shots are gonna make me sick. Ugh. I really can't. I don't know if you follow this channel or not, but I really can't take close-up shots that are that close. I don't know what it is, the radius of movement or whatever, it's just too extreme for me.
Ich habe den Plan gefasst, dass ich die Familie mit mir mitnehme. Die Idee, dass ich die Toten ständig bei mir haben könnte, hat mich unheimlich aufgeregt.
He also just doesn't like being alone, I guess. I really feel bad for these actors during this sequence in particular. Nobody looks like they're having a good time.
Entschlossen, dass es jetzt erst richtig losgehen soll. Ich wollte meinen Fantasien total freien Lauf lassen. Ich wollte den neuen Opfern die Leichen zeigen. Ich war überzeugt, dass ich...
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of profile of this character, how much he lives in fantasy and delusion, that he thinks he's going to be able to get to a new victim and showcase these corpses to them.
Dass ich die neuen Opfer mit den Leichen zusammensperre.
Yeah, he has a kind of projection of himself as being far more calculated and far more
Damit würde ich ihnen furchtbar
willful
Angst
than he
einjagen.
actually manages to be
Einige
in
würden sie
execution.
sicher zu Tode erschrecken. Und dann mache ich ein Ende mit ihnen.
And I also like, in terms of this being like a post-climax, how long all of this is taking. We get a sense of, in terms of living in the experience of this character, like how much of a chore all of this is, that none of this is romantic or idealized or superhuman. It's a fucking long, exhausting, ugly process. And none of it even seems particularly enjoyable for him outside of his kind of obsessiveness. We just see his body lurching and aching and trying to keep up and failing him in every instance. In very, very small ways, I think the movie has done a pretty good job of reinforcing that he's not a particularly romantic and a not particularly aspirational depiction of a serial killer. One of the less charismatic depictions of a serial killer and or psychopath. It's got a good back arch though. I love how far this goes to show kind of how still kind of human and boring the process is. Like, he has to take off his fucking pants. He has to take off his clothes and dry off and switch into a suit that's too big for him.
Nach der Tat habe ich mich sehr gut gefühlt. Es war mir leichter im Kopf. Ich habe mich auch körperlich leichter gefühlt.
Like, he's as much a fool as he is a
Dass
maniac.
alles, was ich tue, leichter geht. Als ob ich schweben würde.
Yeah, and there's the kind of dramatic irony, him saying that he felt like everything he was doing is easier now, and in practice, in the actual camera, it's not really shown to be any easier. Just garish, just ridiculous that he's wearing a white tie tuxedo. Taking the doggy along with him. Yeah, dude's just kind of an impulse criminal, an impulse killer. Just doesn't have much control over his faculties. And I like this depiction of him as being really fearful of these old ladies and these children. That despite his megalomania from his previous act, he doesn't really exhibit control over other people or his actions around other people. He still has that angst. So the angst that he wished to instill on others is still instilled with him. And he puts on, this is my Joker origin story, he puts on this like increasingly grotesque and bizarre costume, manner of dress, and he thinks that it's disguising him to the world when his outward facade is betraying him. He can't actually hide the monster that he is. Pax. The first newspaper said war, this one says peace. Sometimes the storytelling gets a little blunt.
Meine Fantasie ist mit mir richtig durchgegangen.
Just hear those fucking gnashing sounds again.
Ich schnapp sie mir alle 4. Hier und jetzt.
Yeah, let's see if his reality ends up matching his fantasy. And now the cops are like circling him like a predator circles prey. It's a nice shot. Capturing him in the rearview mirror.
Mich hat das total aufgeregt.
Aber ich hab doch damit gar nichts zu tun. Ich weiß wirklich nicht, was sie von mir wollen.
Gleich werden jetzt alle zu Tode erschrecken. Alle haben jetzt Angst vor mir. Ich bin berühmt.
Alle hast Angst vor mir.
Schade nur um die beiden Mädchen. Das hätte noch einen hübschen Tango gegeben.
I don't know if it's doing it intentionally or what its intention is. What I read from that is the look on the girls' faces. It wasn't fear, it wasn't angst. What they were displaying was disgust. And perhaps that's the ultimate final emotion of this movie, that our attitude towards these creatures, these outliers, psychopaths, murderers, that we shouldn't live in constant fear of them and venerate them and make them famous. We shouldn't live in fear of their actions. We should display disgust for their actions. Cool. That was Angst. Yeah. Despite the reputation that this movie has, I'm actually kind of, maybe it's just my reading of the movie, but I'm glad that the movie didn't take the position of, in any way, trying to venerate his actions or give an interpretation to the audience that might be enjoyable or cathartic or pleasurable in any sort of way. There may be a contingency of the audience that gets like a morbid fascination or sadistic fascination out of the things that he does in this movie, but you can't really account for that part of the audience or that part of the human impulse. I think for the most part it doesn't portray his actions as being more than human or being aspirational in any way. He's shown to be quite deranged, quite impotent, cowardly, at a disconnect between his fantasy life and his real faculties. Like, it's not a character that you're not really living a power fantasy by living in Kay's journey throughout this movie. Yeah, so I'm glad it had that aspect in it. I didn't know if it did, and I worried watching this kind of movie that all it would have to say is that like this kind of violence is terrible, and like just showcasing the violence itself would be like, I guess like clinically interesting, but really it would cater or please a certain kind of crowd. And while that still remains in effect, that this has the sort of lurid fascination of being an extremely violent and depraved movie, it doesn't try to elevate its protagonist as a side effect of that. Yeah, really disconcerting, disorienting, upsetting kind of sound design and camera work to this movie. Upsetting performance, obviously, by Later and by the actors portraying the family, the victims. Yeah, the camera work is just like so fucking upsetting to me. I can't look at that kind of stuff without really getting physically ill. Uh I can't even play like PlayStation games without getting sick. Uh yeah, that was Angst. I can see why it drummed up as much controversy as it did. Uh yeah, I wouldn't recommend you check this out. And if you are the certain kind of person who has an appetite for Angst, you've probably checked it out before I ever showed it. But uh, I guess an important um an important addition in the annals of history. I wonder if this cinematographer got any work after this, because they did a really great job. Yeah, that was Angst. I feel sick as shit. I gotta go to bed. I gotta sleep forever. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for more old, obscure, and art house films. And until next time, keep watching good movies.